Hello and welcome to the Wow Show, an hour full of stories from and for truck drivers on the road. We're going to have fun saying thank you for who you are and what you do as drivers. And we're going to talk to some people who know their stuff so that we can learn more. My name is David Binyachek. I'm your host. Let's get started. Hey there, Canada. Happy Monday to you. This is David and the Wow Show. I hope the sun is shining on the hood of your truck or in the office that you're working and on your soul today. Today is about politics. We're in a season of politics and the Conservative race for the leadership 2022 for the Conservative Party of Canada. You're going to be in for a treat. My guest today is Grant Abraham. He's an international lawyer that has a passion for this country and has become the 12th person to put their hat in the ring for the leadership race. Grant, thanks for being on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, David. Thank you.
Awesome. So Grant, why don't we start off with this? Because there's going to be a lot to talk about. I want to talk about the convoy and then want to get into your vision for this country and why you entered the race. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this place.
Well, I love Canada. I was raised in Alberta and BC, and probably like many Canadians over the last 40 years haven't worried so much about what's going on in government because sometimes it was really hard to tell whether there was a conservative or a liberal government in place. And of course, we all know this last 2 or 3 years, that is not true. And as I've watched things happen, not just the truckers' convoy, and I hope we get to talk a bit about that, but just other things over the last 3 or 4 years, just small things in terms of erosion of due process or other legal matters that people might not notice in the country happening. I've just started to get more and more concerned. And then as January 2020 started, I really had some yellow and red flags go up, and I've been watching what's going on. And I guess really the answer to your question is, why am I doing this? Because I've watched this agenda being rolled out by the Liberal government, and I've seen the Conservative Party be completely unable to stop this new arrangement, this new Canada. Everyone says, where did my Canada go? Where did our country go? And there is an agenda that is happening in the country, and that is why people are asking that question. And it's difficult to pin down how that's happened and what the Liberal government's doing to make it happen. And that's something that I hope we get to talk about today, because we don't want those things to happen in the country. We want to see the country full of hope and peace and freedom. And we want to be able to, create a better life for our kids and not live with a huge government smothering our freedoms. And so I've entered this race because I've watched the Conservatives now forfeit 2 victories in the last 2 elections. And I think perhaps it may be time for some outside voices, people that have done other things, people that have done stuff in other countries and maybe have a better perspective of how the world sees Canada than maybe some of the career politicians. And I know that with the amazing people that we have in this country and a calculation for freedom, we can move in the next generation to a much stronger place than we are right now. And that's really the simplest vision that I see for this country. We got to get back to truth. We got to get back to transparency, and we got to start having real conversations about what is really going on in the country.
I like it. So, yeah, you mentioned with the need for someone with an outside viewpoint, someone who's been abroad and sees how others see Canada and our nation. You've got some experience in politics, and you have moved your family for a bit to Ireland, and you were actually asked to run in a British election. Can you speak just briefly to that?
Well, that was a very unusual thing that happened. I had never aspired to politics, but in recent years, Britain has, as many of you may have noticed or noted, Britain had voted to leave the European Union in the Brexit vote. And that has been a significant sea change. It's been like a dramatic change for the nation because they left really almost 50 years of European governance, European laws, and took back their nation. They took back their sovereignty, and they brought back their own law for the control of freedom and how that what their life and culture and way of life was going to look like, their nationhood, their sovereignty. And that was what the Brexit vote was about. And for Northern Ireland, where I lived at the time, that was a particularly important thing because Northern Ireland is the only land border with the European Union. And what that meant for Northern Ireland, given the Catholic and the Protestant conflict that we all know about in the past, was a very significant thing in terms of trade and how the EU was going to relate to the UK at that border. And so I sat down with some thoughts and sent a letter, a note, an email more properly, into the UK Conservative and Unionist Party and said, hey, this is what I think. I sent it to like an info at email.co. I filled out a form. I ticked the box and I thought, I will never hear from these people again because I'm sure they think there's all kinds of people that send notes with all kinds of wild ideas. But in my case, I got an email response back in 2 hours and met one of the leaders of the party in Northern Ireland a couple of days after this. And that started a journey that within a week, I had gone through my candidacy to become an MP candidate in the Conservative Party in the UK. And was at a meet and greet at a hotel meeting Boris Johnson and having that process completed and approved. And then I entered the Conservative race in 2019. We knew that in Northern Ireland, there was never going to be an English kind of Conservative UK party MP elected, but we did it as part of really a symbol of unity for the UK. To have some MP candidates running in all 4 countries of the United Kingdom. And I'm into unity. And I think Canada needs to be together, and we need to build together, and we need to start taking down the walls that have been put up to make us separate. And so I'm a real advocate for our own sovereignty and to learn some of the lessons that Europe's taught us, but also to remove the barriers of unity, that the barriers that cause disunity that have been created in our country. And so that's a big piece of it. You know what? I knew I would lose horribly in the British election. I knew that. They told me that. I still ran in that election, and I did lose horribly. But the party won with an incredible majority, and Boris Johnson, of course, is sitting in power right now. And my success was tripling the vote from the last MP that had run in my constituency. And it was a real pleasure and honor to be a part of that election. And it taught me an awful lot in terms of the process and the journey in relation to communication and the things that are important to the heart of people. Yeah. And that's what I want to talk about, because I'm actually really sick of hearing about what politicians think about what people want. I'm interested in the pulse, the actual heartbeat of the people. And that's why the convoy was such an amazing thing for Canada. And it really brought to the surface again what Canada is about.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So, you filled out the form in Great Britain and you got a response. And the truth is, with the convoy, many truckers filled out the form and they really didn't hear back. So I'm going to kind of give you my thoughts on how this convoy played out here in Canada on the world stage, as it turned out to be, and then you get your thoughts about it. So, it all started with a request from the government, so the federal Liberal government, to bring in industry associations across Canada to the table for quote unquote consultations. And from someone that I know that was in the room, the truth was they went around the table and they were inquiring, this was in the fall of last year, whether their plans for a January 15th mandate for cross-border drivers being fully vaccinated was a good thing to do. And around the table, it was unanimous. Every single association said, don't do it. And it wasn't pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. It was, number one, our supply chain is in a horrible place, and we're 20,000 drivers short already. And if you want to exasperate that, this would be a good way. Number two was simply out of respect and honor for them being heroes at the beginning of the pandemic, when we didn't know how bad this was, and we didn't necessarily have solutions to help people get through it. And number three was their environment. I mean, these guys spend, and gals increasingly, spend 13 to 14 hours a day locked in a steel cage. And you want to isolate people and have people isolate themselves. There is no single profession that greater isolates themselves than being a professional truck driver. And so they're saying they're not a risk. We understand that you need to protect Canadians' health and safety, but are these people really the ones you want to target? And so the government had that session. They heard that feedback. It was unanimous from the association saying, don't do it. And they did it anyways. So in my mind, it left many trucking families. There were 25,000 trucking families that were potentially affected for cross-border in Canada. The PMTC, Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, did a survey, and they found that 67% of truckers in the private sector, which is almost half of the Canadian sector, so a good representation, were vaccinated, meant that 33% were not, and that represented 25,000 families. And they were left alone. And honestly, you know, as everyone has seen, the convoy that ended up in Ottawa was much more than trucking. So, you know, as this convoy started from the West Coast and the East Coast and started to converge and go towards Ottawa, I think what they became were lions of justice for every Canadian who kind of felt not listened to, not heard, their freedoms being taken away. And there were some groups that attached themselves to these truckers that came on board, and a lot of them were awesome. And a lot of them, in fact, became the de facto voice of these truckers instead of the associations who had tried to speak, but had failed to persuade the government. And then they ended up in Ottawa. And the truth is, you talk about unity. Well, Canadians have never been more divided, but the trucking industry is divided. There are those in the trucking industry that are, you know, super proud of the people that were there and the people that represented trucking there for being peaceful, for being honorable, for, you know, fighting for freedom. And then there's a part of the industry that is kind of holding their heads down and going, did this give us a bad name? Were the people that, you know, had the agendas to overthrow the government and all the things that were being associated with this convoy by the media, you know, have we muddied our name, and we're trying to get a better name for ourselves. It was an emotional event. I covered the convoy coming through Calgary. I went out to the overpass by the Petro-Canada just west of Calgary and watched them come in. And that overpass was lined with hundreds of people, young, small, old, every culture, every race, every age group, waving Canadian flags, holding signs, "We love you, truckers." There were 100 cars on one side of the road. There were 100 cars on the other side of the road. And from a friend later on that night, I heard that scene wasn't just at that overpass. He drove from Edmonton to Calgary, and every single overpass in the province of Alberta had the same scene cheering on truckers. Now, professional drivers is probably one of the most thankless occupations traditionally you could ever choose. And as they went across Canada, you know, they finally, and this is one of the things that I loved about it, is they finally got the message, thank you, trucker. Thank you for what you do. And they came into Ottawa, and in many cases, the environment was toxic because the government hadn't listened. They now had groups representing them that had toxic relationships with the government, and it resulted in the Emergency Act. So I'll get your thoughts on, how did you see the convoy? You know, many of the Conservatives were out taking pictures with them and celebrating them. I loved Denise Batters, Senator Batters' speech in the Senate as they were addressing, you know, having to approve or send back the bill that was in front of them. And she says, "I've never felt more safe walking home at night from the Parliament buildings." So very different accounts. What are your thoughts on the convoy?
Well, there's so many pieces in there. Well, let me start here. it's unprecedented in Canada to have a vaccine imperative move us away from our long established understanding of medical privacy. And when you look deeper into that reality and you consider that our forefathers fought for things like freedom, for things like the messages that we learned from World War II that created the Nuremberg Code, that laid down that our bodily autonomy was a private matter, the issue of consent being an imperative to the medical profession, all of those things have been washed away as essential foundational principles that guide our nation. And so it's not about whether you're vaxxed or not at all. The issue is that it's a private matter. What the government policy has done to Canada is it's created a medical apartheid in this nation. So now we have, I think it's much bigger than a small minority of people who cannot travel on public transport, airplanes or trains. Both of those infrastructures were actually paid for by taxpayers. And to exclude Canadians from being able to travel across the country to go to funerals or to birthdays or see dying relatives is simply atrocious. It's unbelievable that our nation is here. It's completely insensitive and it's an embarrassment. So we really need to look at that, especially given some of the trending now in terms of health for the unvaxxed and vaxxed in relation to COVID and what's happening in terms of health and some of those realities. So we need to look at that. In terms of the convoy itself, I didn't get to go there. Every kind of fiber in my being wanted to be there, but I have had the opportunity to talk to many people from many different perspectives. I was able to see the amazing diversity of Canadians that were there celebrating Canada. And I love that because I saw Sikh people, I saw people from East Africa, I saw people that were from Quebec, I saw people from Asia, all Canadians there together celebrating what Canada is about: peace, unity, love, and a standing up for what it is that Canada is about. You know, that sense of neighborliness that we have. We have a beautiful dignity in this nation of caring for people. And everybody that I've talked to that was at that convoy reflected the sentiment that you talked about, which was safety, unity, peace, alignment, and even to the level of some people that I heard talk about it being almost a spiritual thing in relation to a sense of peace and freedom. Yeah. And, you know, so there's some interesting comments that I heard about that, and it was an overwhelming sense. And I watched the veterans remove the offensive fence that was put up around the war memorial, ostensibly to keep it safe from the veterans or whoever the occupiers were, as they were called. And I watched them come together, and I watched them say the Lord's Prayer, sing the national anthem, and then one of the military chaplains delivered a devotional. And after that, some of the comments from some of those veterans that have served our nation and sacrificed their bodies and friends to protect our way of life and our understanding of liberty, you know, commented and said, you know, there's something spiritual about what is going on in Ottawa here. So to then see what had happened, you know, you mentioned the Conservative MPs standing with the truckers. There were some that kind of stood quite timidly and said, you know, as long as this is a lawful protest, you know, this is great. Yep. And which I appreciate. And I understand that politicians need to be careful with their words. But, you know, but the irony is that one day they were saying, yeah, we support the truckers. And the next day they were saying, well, we've heard you truckers, time to go home. We're going to do a deal with the Bloc de Québécois, and we're going to get this sorted out this way. Well, of course they failed. But the worst impact of that communication was that they actually let the Canadian people down and the supporters within the Conservative Party who actually rallied around what the instinct of the truckers was, which was to raise up peace, unity, freedom, and stand for our charter rights in the face of a tyrannical government. And you know what? That is the real conversation here. We watched in Canada, we watched parking tickets trump our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And we need to do something about that. And what followed in terms of Tamara Lich being arrested and put in shackles for her bail hearing and the seizing of Canadians' accounts is simply outrageous. It is outrageous. So those are the reasons why I'm engaging this discussion, because this is not the Canada that I know.
Yep.
It's not the Canada that I want our children to receive from our generation or our grandchildren to receive from us. And we need to stand up. We actually need to raise a righteous standard back up and not be afraid to stand up for truth and have these tough conversations. I'm sick of the reality of conversation of issues in our nation, if they're unpalatable or the CBC doesn't want to talk about them, being identified as a conspiracy theory. We got to get real, because we have an amazing country, but it's being sold out to a globalist perspective, and it's moving us to post-nationalism. And we do not want to go there.
So let me follow up those points with this. As a leadership coach, I often tell people that 75% of people that leave a job, leave a company, leave so because they don't get along with the values of that particular environment. It has nothing to do with pay, has nothing to do with, and we've identified some of the core Canadian values. And I think both sides are playing on those values that is causing this division and this lack of unity in our country. And so for many, and these are the people that you're going to have to talk to in your campaign, their heart is closed to the argument because they have been sold that the actions that were taken were done to protect the public good. And so in the same light that Canadians are respectful, that they're kind, that they're caring, they see that as an action towards fulfilling those values. And I've often told people, I said, I think Canadians need to step back in this time of disunity and recognize that we do have the same goals. That's always a good place to start. When you're arguing with someone, step back and say, where are you going? Mm-hmm. And like, for example, around COVID, it was like 98% of Canadians can agree that we don't want more people that have to die from this thing.
Yeah.
That we don't want our nurses and doctors overwhelmed and burnt out by the end of this thing. And that there is PTSD almost associated with the trauma of this event as finances and families are affected. We need to minimize that. I think almost every Canadian can agree on that. That's a great place to start, and then say, we have different opinions on how to get there.
Sure. Well, and that's fair enough. And I think in the beginning, when it was 2 weeks to take down the threat of COVID and we had lockdowns, we all accepted and understood and embraced those measures. The problem was that it was a runaway snowball. And what happened, if you remember back to October 2020, November 2020, Prime Minister Trudeau made an announcement at the UN I think it was the UN. He made an announcement. He said, COVID-19 has provided this nation with an opportunity for a reset, right? And that was right out of the COVID response. The problem is that it's gone way beyond health. It's gone way longer than it needs to. Canada is the only country in the world where unvaccinated citizens can't fly or go on a train. All the countries in Europe have removed their mandates. Restrictions on travel, and yet we still have them. And so in the middle of this reset, we had, as he alluded to it in November 20, we had an election in November 21. There were comments made about Canada moving to a post-national state. There was a reference to this being such a significant election because there was going to be groundbreaking changes embedded in the discussion and the mandate that was given in the 2021 election, but there were no conversations about what that actually meant for the nation. And so what's actually happened has gone way beyond health. We're now dealing with an erosion of our due process. We see our civil liberties eroded. We're seeing people locked in jail for mischief. Mischief used to be a charge that was brought against kids for, spray painting walls. Now we're locking up peaceful grandmothers and pastors of churches who disagree with the overbearing restrictions on health. So there are some significant erosions to how our country's working, and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is becoming optional for the government, and that's not the way that it's supposed to work.
Eres la oficial, baby, no remix, yeah. Todas tus amigas, ese y Miss Me Girl. Todos necesitamos algún día ese feeling, yeah. Ay, sonríe tú, pero el feliz soy yo. Vete pa' que me bautices. Entre la luna y el sol, pegado siento calor, yeah, yeah. Como una historia pa' que me deslice. Y el deslizado soy yo, como haciendo el amor, yeah, yeah. Es que estoy puesto pa' ti, en la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí, bebé. Es que estoy puesto pa' ti, en la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí. Lo que quieres, que te caiga en la casa como FedEx. Rapidito pa' uno de esos si te atreves. Y si caigo por la noche será de más, será de más. Fresco como mentor, te caliento como el sol. Baby, no te hago el favor, hacemos el amor. Eso es a puro vapor. Y el que se siente mejor si es penalti pedimos el bar. A lo Messi te meto ese gol. En la disco queremos perrear y a solas pues darnos calor. Down, 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 yeah. No se trata de frontear ni de decir que eres mía. Solo quiero disfrutar tu compañía noche y día. Down, down, down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Baby, yeah. Es que estoy puesto por ti. En la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí, bebé. Es que estoy puesto para ti. En la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí. Vente pa' que me bautices. Entre la luna y el sol, pegado siento calor, yeah, yeah. Como una historia pa' que me deslices. Y el deslizado soy yo, como haciendo el amor, yeah, yeah. Es que estoy puesto por ti, en la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí, bebé. Es que estoy puesto para ti, en la cama va a fluir. Lo que yo siento por ti, lo que tú sientes por mí.
Take a train ride just to see you. Ride for hours just to please you. You don't know how much I need you. 'Cause you're my home away from home, away from home, away from being alone. Run away from
calculated. You can't be trusted. You want the world for your own. You want maximum profit.
So if you were to kind of explain your recipe for unity, what would that be? Restoring unity in this country, because Canadians are divided. And here's the thing. I mean, we think both with our heart and with our head. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that on the polar opposite sides, increasingly Canadians' hearts have hardened to their point of view and their side. And when someone's heart is hardened, there's no use talking because they refuse to rationalize. And it just ends up in this huge blow up, and there's nothing that productive. You've got to soften people's hearts first if you want to achieve unity. How do you do that?
Well, my perspective is that we go back to some of our foundation stones in the nation. And some of the starting point for me is that it's the primary importance of the individual in society and recognizing individual rights. We've actually shifted to a country now that is interested more in a collective ideological perspective, a collective idea. The value is on what the group thinks, not on the inalienable rights of the individual. And so what made our country great was that you could live and work and worship the way that you wished. That is now changing because there is a collective idea that is said to be the higher standard of thought or perspective for the nation. And so we need to go back to that value of the individual at the center of our society. We need to move away from overbearing government that starts to define what happens at the kitchen table in terms of discussions. There's so many parts of that's so significant. So the first one is the individual, getting back to our understanding of the value of the individual and society that makes society work. The individual, family, and the community that is made up of those parts. The second thing is, and this is where our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is so valuable, and I think we've forgotten this, is that our nation is founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And that sentence ends, and I hear Brian Peckford say that. I read it when I was in law school and I loved it. It's got a colon at the end. And that means that every single section of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is read with that preamble at the beginning, technically. Mm-hmm. But yet we've simply allowed that to be forgotten. Now, what's the importance of the supremacy of God and the rule of law? Well, first of all, the supremacy of God is where our rights come from. It's not from the government. It's from that recognition that there are inalienable rights in men and women that give them the right to move and be free and to create a living and live where they want to and worship the way that they want to. Those are our inalienable rights. That's why we have a charter that has codified them. And we temper those rights with the rule of law. So how that works is we have rights, and then we have the rule of law to ensure that we love our neighbor as ourselves, we don't do harm to others, and we create a contented functioning society where rights and freedoms are balanced against care and concern for others. And that's what's made Canada such a great nation. Yet we've forgotten the synergy of that tensioning, and we've got to get back to that. So if you get back to the individual as the core piece, building block of the nation, the family, and then the community. And then you go back to finding the fusion and the energy that exists in relation to balancing our inalienable rights that come from an understanding of the supremacy of God, and then temper it with the rule of law. That's the core piece for what we need to get back to. And we need to remember that, I am not taking a view that everyone needs to worship God. What I'm saying is that the Judeo-Christian civic moral code is what has provided liberty for Western nations and the strongest economies to actually grow and thrive. And so, whether you choose to believe in God or not, that has been the moral framework that has built the nation. And I think it's naive for anybody to suggest that that hasn't been a good idea, or to throw it out for some new social experiment, which is what's happening now.
Yeah. So that points to, just the kind of the practical differences. You've, in my mind, kind of expressed a framework of the role of government being setting up an environment where individuals can safely exercise their freedom in community with one another. And so I just want to get your thoughts on the distinction between the two. And I'll use a recent event, and I've actually told this story on the show before, but recently a trucker near Drumheller in Alberta, they had a tragic fire on their property acreage, and they lost his new truck, lost a lot of his equipment. The building burnt down. And of course, for trucking, your truck is your income. And if it's not running, then things are not good. I was part of a convoy of a different sort. See, convoys are not new to trucking. They have a history and a storied history of being a representation of community. And even in minus 40-degree temperatures, which it was that day, of course, there were like 40 to 50 trucks that gathered at a gathering spot, and they took food. And they took spare parts because he had an older truck that he wanted to get back on the road to start earning some income again. They took cash. And in the end, what happened is that he had all the parts that he needed. He had more cash than he required, and he had more food than he needed. And in true trucking fashion, this is the heart of trucking, he gave what he didn't need back to the people who needed it in the community. Mm. So my point is this, but it's hard, I think, for people to picture how that works. And that's going to be my question to you, is that when community drives our society, then the resources that are needed to take care of people already exist. There's no new budget required. In the act of doing that, it actually brings people closer together. That convoy that day tightened relationships. Mm-hmm. When you have a common cause and you have people rallying around it, communities get tight. They're no longer open your garage door, drive in, don't talk to your neighbor, open up your garage door, go to work. And the daily routine that exists in so many places across Canada. I'm not anti-government. I'm not an anarchist. Government does play a role. But when government is the only entity that can respond, it requires approval of a budget, taxes go up, and people feel talked to instead of this community conversation. Mm. So I understand that many Canadians feel like it's the role of government to provide in some of these areas, and they don't see, and thus may be hesitant to accept a viewpoint that community is the better alternative. How does that, a group of individuals coming together and just making it happen, how does that look for you in your mind? What's your vision for that in Canada?
Well, let me just say, first of all, it is interesting that when you think about the spirit of that convoy that helped their neighbor and rescued him from a fire and rebuilt his economic infrastructure and gave him the resources to feed his family, that's really what the spirit of Canada has been about for hundreds of years, in terms of helping your fellow man or woman cope and get on with life and get over those bumps. So we've migrated towards this insular kind of almost closeted reality, like you said, about the driving into your garage door and closing the door. That hasn't been the spirit of the country. And I think When you think now that we actually have these COVID restrictions, or have had the COVID restrictions that have actually enforced those walls between neighbors and communities, and not only enforced them, monitored them, as I understand it, through cell phone monitoring. That's a big breach of privacy of Canadians, and yet our government has done it and hardly hasn't blinked. So, you know, that is where we want to get back to, because the community is there. The community knows the truth. The community knows where there's real need, and the community is much more efficient than the government and its policy. And that's why I like strong communities that are built on family and the strength the strength of an individual in a family, in a community, because that's the most robust model for caring for people.
And I agree. So here's the question: how does a government empower that? So what are some practical things that, as a leader of a government, Prime Minister of Canada, what are some practical things that a government can do to let go and, you know, you might say let God and let the individuals like take over without, you know, fearing, or many Canadians fearing that there will be gaps and holes created by, you know, hoping that people will pick up the slack?
Well, I think the beginning of that answer starts with even how we do education and allowing opportunities for young people to move into careers, either in entrepreneurship or through university or through trade and vocational training. We have a huge shortage of trade and vocational employees in the nation. And we want to get back to creating a pride and a dignity in work, and not creating a scenario where young people, when they finish high school or university or whatever level of education they do, all they have to look forward to is universal income and a hopeless future where they'll never buy a house. And so if we can create scenarios where we have economic opportunity across the nation, and not just in the cities, but in the smaller towns and economic areas in this country, that then starts to build the communities, and it fosters the amazing gift sets that are in young Canadians across this country. And I don't see that happening. And I see almost a hopelessness in youth now. And I think that's the starting point, because all those individuals are actually the future economic engines, and maybe developing services or businesses or products or intellectual property that our nation needs to thrive. And so unless we're actually getting back to unleashing that spirit of enterprise and pioneership that built this nation, we're going to struggle. And I'm so opposed to this hopelessness that's coming into the nation in terms of this concept of universal income that has crept in through COVID being an opportunity for a reset.
So when it comes to prosperity for Canadians, you've expressed those two kind of polar opposite views. Either the government takes care of you, or, you know, economic activity and business does. In any election and in between, Conservatives are accused of being too business friendly. In terms of giving tax breaks to businesses who, in the view of the left, don't trickle down the benefits to everyday Canadians. And I don't know if that's true. It's certainly what they accuse Conservatives of doing. Where's that balance? Where's the balance between, you know, letting business, because I've seen many business leaders who are extremely philanthropic and who are about their employees, and they actually create the communities in Canada by their caring of the people underneath them. To stereotype every single business owner that has made a fortune in Canada and be angry at them, I think, is a dangerous stereotype to do. And the government's actively doing that. And so they just, you know, how are we going to pay for these programs? And the universal income will make the rich pay. And many of those people are just people that have worked hard, have done it honestly, who actually support an entire community by the jobs that they've created. And it's not the vision that's being painted of who these people are. Where's the balance between business and how that works?
Well, you asked me a fairly complex question there on the last question. I really only started with my first answer, which is empowerment of people, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that if you break down the discussion that is live now within the Conservative Party, or will be within the Conservative Party, that there's all these divisions within the party where people like to talk about fiscal conservatives, those that are only interested in the money, and then there's those that are kind of assigned to be social conservatives that are interested in all the social policy. That conversation in itself creates a barrier, and it creates disunity. So I've always observed, whether it's here or in other nations, that, you know, people that talk about money all the time have a hard time moving into the social policy discussions. But there are people that understand the social issues that in our case, Canadians care about, who can also think in a fiscally responsible way. And I think that's probably how I view myself in relation to this political spectrum, someone who understands the important symmetry between prudent financial management and strong social policy, where the government helps people that are in need. And that's my definition of what inclusiveness is. Inclusiveness is helping people that are underprivileged, that need a leg up, that need to get on their feet, that need to have support, maybe to get a little bit more education so they can find a job, or have some support to get out of a difficult health issue. That's where we do need government. And I'm not saying that we go to a minimalist scenario, because Canada, the beauty of Canada is that we have a strong social care net, but we also have an entrepreneurial spirit that creates our corporate engines and our companies and our family businesses and our sole proprietorships that make amazing coffee on the corners, or shawarmas, or whatever. And we need that whole spectrum. And so it's finding that tension and that symmetry together. And that's the beauty of what our nation has been. And that's why in so many ways we are so different from the United States, where there isn't that same social care net. And people are left to be on islands in terms of despair sometimes, or being lost in society.
So get your views on prioritizing. As you were talking, I was thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And really, I'm going to give you my viewpoints, and then you can comment whether you agree or whether you have a different take on it. When it's this discussion of economics versus social, there's a part of me that says Maslow's proven that unless people's basic needs are taken care of, they don't have a capacity to think about all those other things. And so, for example, in marriage, finances is the number one reason that a marriage breaks up. If we do not have a government that creates an environment that drives economic activity to the prosperity of Canadians, they don't have a chance of getting along, because you're so consumed with the uncertainty of a lack of finances that it wedges relationships and it drives people apart. And the danger today is not only is that financial insecurity heightened in amongst families, Canadians are at record levels of debt, but now our government as well has gone from a fiscally balanced budget in the last year of Stephen Harper's government to astronomical debt, a portion of which I think most conservatives would agree was necessary and appropriate in terms of the original response to COVID. But to me, the priority is set the economic table, and then all the social issues we love to discuss and argue about and talk about. Those start to become healthier discussions because the foundation is there. And I know foundation is an important word to you. So your thoughts on that?
Well, what are we doing? I mean, what are we doing in Canada? What have we done in these recent years? We've shut down our economy. Why have we shut down our economy? We shut down our economy because there's a perspective of a Green New Deal and climate change. And that's such an interesting conversation, because there's this specter of climate change that is measured in such a narrow band, yet it's changing our whole economic perspective in terms of what our nation does and how it operates and what it sells. And yet we see oil at the prices that we're at right now. We're between $1.70 and $2 a liter in Canada. and yet we're what, the second or third largest reserve for oil in the world, and maybe second for natural gas. That is the energy that the world needs, and yet we've totally curtailed our ability to supply it. So the big engine in Canada has actually been shut down. So we've got to kind of get our economy working. We need to provide opportunity for all of the businesses that have been in this country. And when I looked recently at the amount of businesses that have closed, it's shocking. We've stifled and smothered the entrepreneurial spirit. So, that is the leading edge of the policy in terms of this synthesis, this combination of finance and social policy. Yeah. And maybe just to go a little bit further, we're actually taxing Canadians further. Tomorrow, the carbon tax goes up in Canada. So I expect that prices will go up in Canada. It's going to add to inflation. And yet we're buying oil from companies or countries that we might call frenemies. In some senses, how does that make sense? So we really need to return to discussions within Canada that elevate the needs of Canadians first. I care about the environment. I don't want to see us contributing to climate degradation, but we've got to recognize that Canada contributes to less than 2% of the carbon in the world. We've signed on to the Paris Treaty. And yet I don't think there's an accounting for the level of carbon sump that Canada is, that effect of actually what we absorb as a nation in our vast wildernesses and green terrains. And we need to have those kinds of conversations. And yet we're we've signed into a treaty that is, we're paying for, Canadians are paying for to protect the environment. And yet the biggest polluters in the world are not contributing to the cost of caring for the environment and contribute much vaster percentages of carbon to the world. So I think we really need to look at that. There's a way to steward our environment. There's a way to ensure that we're not contributing to the deterioration and the concern for climate. I live here, my kids live here. I want to see our world thrive, but I don't want to see Canadians shackled because of a very small population in the global landscape subsidizing the polluting effects of nations like India and China that have billions of people.
So here's my around the environmental piece. Here's my perception, and I'll give it to you and ask your opinion. Is that politicians on all sides have been guilty of playing the or card. So it's either oil and gas or green energy in the form of wind or solar or electrical when it comes to automobiles. And they do it because very much from a regional perspective, Canada has different strengths. So obviously on the prairies, we are gifted and blessed with oil and natural gas, as they are in the Maritimes in Newfoundland and Labrador. And there's a project that's pending approval right now that the government's kind of taking ages to do. But then there's provinces like Quebec and Ontario that have immense flowing rivers, and the electrical potential is huge to not only provide power and energy to Canada, but to a good portion of the US.
Yeah,
because Canada has over half of. I get angry because I don't think it has to be oil and gas or electricity. I think it can be oil and gas and electricity. That doesn't have to be Ontario or Alberta or Quebec or British Columbia. I think it can be Alberta and Quebec. In the last election campaign, the Conservatives presented a power grid. I forget the official name of it, but a national energy plan that potentially offered some solutions around creating that environment where, maybe Canada goes green before a lot of other countries in the world and we go electrical if it makes sense, but yet we're exporting our environmentally sound practices of producing oil to other countries in the world that still need it.
Right.
And so we're leveraging both. So, if Alberta wins, Quebec doesn't have to lose. If Quebec wins, Alberta doesn't have to lose. The beauty of being different is, as a team, we're powerful.
Well, and that's why we're better together as a nation. And that's why my second point in terms of my platform would be to reunify as a nation. And I love that example. And, so shutting down oil and gas and focusing on green energy is a nice concept. But what are we seeing happening in terms of prices? Because everyone still drives, gas operated cars. I've seen places in Europe where cities have moved to battery operated cars, and the batteries have run out way too soon, and it costs way too much to put a new battery, and the cars are sitting in airstrips where they can't be used. And so if you look at what Europe has done, they were ahead of us in moving towards a green agenda. And what has happened? Germany is a perfect example. Energy prices have gone up. The consumer is paying more and more and more. They're shutting down coal refineries and energy generators and relying on Russian gas. But look at what is going on now in Ukraine with regard to geopolitics and a Russian agenda. And Germany really can't take too strong a position, or the entire nation could be very cold in the middle of a European winter. So they've created actually a national security issue because, first of all, the green energy policies haven't worked. It hasn't contributed to a sustainable grid that actually can allow the country to operate. And they've created a reliance on foreign energy that obviously has its own perspectives about what Russian hegemony or authority should look like in Europe. And they now have a geopolitical risk on their hands because they're energy dependent without having created other sources of energy that they could rely upon. And so Canada needs to learn from that. I mean, we actually are a nation that sits on 4 borders. We don't think of ourselves that way. We kind of always see ourselves isolated as kind of sitting on top of the US. But in this shrinking world, we actually share an Arctic border with Russia. We have China to our west as a huge trading bloc. We have the US to our south, and we have Europe, all of Europe, to our east. And we need to start thinking in terms of our own geopolitical perspectives and think for ourselves and for our interests. And if we can help our allies along the way, then we should do that.
So you mentioned China, you mentioned, the global trading blocks. In many ways, the world has become more global. Technology and air travel have made this a much smaller world and accessible for most people. When conservatives talk about global, it tends to be in a negative space. And so the globalist agenda is a common, thing that you'll hear from conservatives, and they're not happy about it. And yet I think often we don't do ourselves any favors because it suggests that we are against global trade. And I don't think that has to be the case. For me, collaboration on a global level has a lot of benefits, but collaboration is best done when every party that comes to the table is independent and strong.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, David, because the term global has become a loaded term. It's been connected to global governance. It's connected to globalization, which has started to have some negative connotations. I'm using it here in the sense that we are a country that maybe is a bit myopic. It doesn't necessarily see beyond itself well on an international scale, and we need to start thinking and looking more international. We need to start getting our own manufacturing base back and developing our industry to complement our vast energy. And that's what I mean. I think you're right about the global perspective. We don't want to move towards a globalist governance because it means moving away from our ability to control our own nation, our own sovereignty, and the boundaries and borders that make up this great nation. And so that's a really good distinction.
Yeah. And so when it comes to trade, what are your thoughts on global trade?
Well, we are an interconnected world. I believe Canada is totally a trading nation, and so we should be a trading nation. And that's where the markets are. We're still only, 40 million people, maybe. So we're really a minnow in terms of what's out there in terms of populations. And we have the ability to create some amazing products. And as I said earlier, intellectual property and services. And the Canadian people should be unleashed to be able to do that. And so I'm all about international trade and prudent and clever trade. And we need to be able to sit down and trade with those countries that are allied with our interests and our global perspective, and use our ability to trade as a part of our global security perspective in terms of what we're supporting and what we're not supporting. So I'm all about trade. I think that's what we need to be doing, and not just having an economy based on a resource-based framework. We need to grow beyond our oil and gas, and that's part of I think the growth edge of what Canada has to have. We need to use these resources that we have, oil and gas, and build other engines for our children's future.
dude, blue moon, kinda mysterious, shaded with someone I'm not really into. Do you need to fix it? Talking bullshit. It's hard to see you when your eyes look dull. Who's gonna save you? Who's gonna make you not blue? Not blue. Blue dew, bad mood, sort of witty and jaded, but let's not talk about you. Your coyote song on a rerun. Are you hound dog tired, singing all night long? Who's gonna save you? Who's gonna make you not blue? Not blue. Not blue dude, blue moon, been one or two since I ran into you. Do you need a picture? Well, that gets old. It's hard to take one when your iPhone's full. Who's gonna save you? Who's gonna make you not blue? Not blue. Not blue.
So you've partially answered, I think, a question that was coming up, and based on what you've just been talking about, traditionally, whether it's in Britain or in Canada, I believe it's true that most people see the conservative roadmap to a balanced budget being austerity, and the liberal, or whatever the equivalent is in other countries, roadmap being government spending to drive economic activity. I think recently, and you know, the personality divides the world completely, and understandably, he was an interesting man. But our neighbor to the south had a leader in Donald Trump who kind of took a different road. I mean, certainly from a spending and cost point of view, he was not austerity. Like they built up some pretty good spending habits when it came to the military, when it came to, they were spending a lot of money, but he created an environment that allowed business to flourish, that had them on one of the best economic scenarios that they have ever seen in the history of their country, despite what you think of the man. And I'm not saying he's perfect, he's certainly not. But the economy he built was not built out of austerity, but yet had a lot of conservative principles to it. Mm-hmm. Do you see a similar path for Canada?
I don't believe that austerity per se in its simplest form is the answer to move us forward, because I'm talking about generating the infrastructure that can actually mobilize wealth creation for new jobs, for entrepreneurship, for industry, for manufacturing base, for agri-food, for food security. And those are the things that we need to put the infrastructure in this country to develop. So it's just as simple a discussion as this. Everybody knows that getting unsecured debt is a bad idea, but everybody understands if you own your own home, that debt's a good thing because you're living in it and it's creating equity and it's creating a framework for your future wealth. And that's how I see government disbursement in terms of developing the nation for where we need to be in the next 20 years. That's where I see job creation. That's where I see the strengthening of economic resiliency for families and communities by creating these new opportunities. We need to look at things like an energy corridor, and we need to look at other diversifications of businesses that we can develop out of our core framework businesses. Like you look at our agricultural engine in Canada, what it could do in terms of feeding the world, but we haven't moved to creating value added to our agri-food businesses. Mm-hmm. That's a huge framework that it really needs to be nurtured and encouraged in terms of the entrepreneurs and the people that are out there that's a passion for. And I think that could be said across the different sectors. Education's another one. You know, Canada's has been, and many people may not know, it's been incredibly influential in providing curriculum and training and education for many parts of the world. And we need to continue to look at that because we have great educators and a compassionate people that care about seeing people develop in their skill sets. So I probably, there's an entire range of policy discussions that we could have here, but on to your point, David, I don't think it's about, you know, closing the bank. It's about putting the money in the place that's going to nurture growth and health and strength in the individual, the family, and the community. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your website, Canada's CANADAS promise .ca or .com. They're linked together. Talk about the promise of Canada in your mind.
Well, my sense is in Canada that we've drifted away from our moorings. We've lost that sense of hope in what our opportunity is as a people and as a nation. We've moved to kind of a desperate hopelessness that has formed in the middle of COVID. And we've lost that ability to dream, or the environment doesn't give the oxygen. I mean, the political environment doesn't give the oxygen necessarily to begin to dream. So when I talk about Canada's promise, I think about the promises that have been breathed into the spirits of generations of Canadians that have built this nation. It's caused people that have aspired to come here to come because they see a certainty of law where they have a legal system that they can trust. They see opportunity to own land and to build a business and to worship in the way that they choose, to allow them to raise their children in the perspectives and ideology and faith that they wish to raise their children without the state telling them what to do or how to think. Those are the whispers of Canada that has built this nation. And I think we've forgotten about, we stopped listening to them. And when I talk about returning to the promise of Canada, the promises of Canada, that's what I'm talking about. And I think we need a fresh start. And so one of my taglines in this campaign is a fresh start, but it's much deeper than just a little cliche about a fresh start. It's about going back to the foundation stones and listening to the aspirations of a nation that are breathed into the very citizenry, where they can say, hey, I can build a better life. I can build a better life for my kids. I can create something, contribute to society, contribute to humanity, heal a disease, whatever the dream is. We need to get back to that environment that fosters those dreams. And that's what Canada's promise is about.
Nice. And the promise needs to go through, in your immediate future, the leadership of the party, the Conservative Party. So let's get back to that. You know what? Well, first of all, I mean, you're going to be the 12th candidate. that has come into the race. And, some of the front runners, they each have very unique identities. And so there's a wide range of identities that have entered this race. And so obviously, I think in many people's minds, Pierre Poilievre is the front runner at this point, if there was an informal poll. And Pierre, to his credit, is probably one of the best attack dogs that Parliament has ever seen, whether it be Conservative, Liberal, or NDP. And people question whether he can move from attack dog to being prime minister, and whether he's the best opposition leader that this Parliament's ever seen. You've got Leslyn Lewis, who is characterized by compassion and courage, and that humanistic social side. And Jean Charest, perhaps by experience, and you can look upon it positively or negatively, but certainly the old school that's come back into the race. How do you see yourself fit? How does Grant Abraham fit into that puzzle?
It's a really great question. Well, I commented earlier on unity, and I think I want to make sure to stay within the margins here in terms of building unity, because I think that's one of the challenges within the party, is that there's too much mudslinging. And so when I look at it's hard to look at the candidates, in fairness, because I'm sure they're good people. They care about their nation. They live in communities. People vote for them. So it's not with a spirit of criticism. But I guess my perspective is that there's all kinds of opportunity for other people to be critical of a financial framework, especially with the Liberal government. And it's not about necessarily being an attack dog. And I have seen the tenacity that Mr. Poilievre brings in the House of Commons, and that's appreciated in certain contexts. But yet, when it comes to other skills like building unity or finding consensus in complex policy discussions, that tenacity polarizes. And I don't know what that skill set is, and it's not fair of me to even comment on it. I think if I have a comment in that quarter, I would say that I would be concerned, because all I hear from Mr. Poilievre is the discussion about putting more money in Canadians' pockets or lowering taxes so Canadians have more money. And I think the issues in our nation are so much bigger than, an extra few dollars in our pocket. The truckers did not go to Ottawa because they were worried about gas charges, gas prices, or taxes. They went to contend for the nation, to return it to the true north, strong and free, in the nation we grew up in. And I think that's a really important conversation for the Conservative Party. Mr. Charest was an MP when I was still in high school. So I'm not sure what to say about that, other than I understand his own constituents removed him from office in 2012, and then he went to work for Huawei. And I have a challenge with that when I consider that we had the two Michaels sitting without chargers in China. And, we can have a conversation another day about 5G, but I have a challenge with that. And I'm not sure how that works. I think Leslyn Lewis seems like a very kind and polite and a nice person. And I'm not sure how she would function in relation to the same discussion that we're having right now about building consensus within a polarized party. I think probably from my social conservative heart, I struggle with some of her votes. She has voted in the wrong way in relation to the pastoral or the conversion therapy bill for religious ministers engaging in the care of people that are perhaps confused or misunderstanding their sexuality. And I don't choose to comment on that issue particularly, but what I would say is I would say that that's a freedom of religion issue. And I think that if I talk to any Canadian that I talk to within the voting constituencies in the places I've been, are shocked that the majority of Conservatives voted to affirm that, or the ones that abstained, like Ms. Lewis, abstained in the wrong way. And we now have an outcome where we have a conversion therapy bill. So, to me, that that seemed to lack the fortitude and strength to stand up, even if there was a threat to have her removed from the caucus or have others removed from the caucus if they voted the wrong way. This goes right into a bigger discussion about what is the issues within the Conservative Party. And one of the biggest issues within the Conservative Party is at a constituency or a riding level is that it used to be that constituents in every riding would talk to their MP or talk to the board within their constituency about issues that were live. And that almost seems to have changed, where it's now the MP telling the constituency what the Conservative policy is. And that's what's driving the grassroots away, because there's a disconnect to the hearts of communities. And we need to return to that space hugely. And that's one of the biggest criticisms. There's others, and I have some other ideas about that in terms of what we need to do within the Conservative Party if I can continue to stay in this race and get to where I need to be to have these discussions.
So I'm, from what you're saying, would you agree then that your ideal scenario as a leader of any party, well, especially of the Conservative Party, is that MPs should be free to vote the will of their constituents?
Well, I think that there's a tension. I think when it comes to charter right issues and kind of these kinds of moral debates or discussions that we have in Canada, there should be freedom of conscience to vote the way that they need to vote. So, sorry, what was your specific question there again?
Yeah, no, it was just like, can MPs vote the conscience of their riding? So like you're saying, going back, talking to their constituents, and if their constituents, they vote this way, even though it may be, they'd be the only person in the party to vote against or for a certain bill, that they would represent their constituents.
In matters like this, I think there should definitely be space for that.
Yeah.
And I think if the party's worried about a bill not passing or not, that's part of what needs to happen before the bill goes to the floor for a vote, to ensure that there's been an alignment or a consensus brought that will bring the victory for that bill. If it's not there, maybe it needs to be tabled.
Right. Okay. So you've got a path ahead of you. Things are just beginning. And for the candidacies, each candidate is going through this. There are some initial hurdles, fundraising, that the Conservative Party holds. So the initial hurdle is $50,000, and I believe it's another $150,000, and then a $100,000 bond. For people that have liked what they heard from you or want to engage you further and have interest in potentially supporting what Grant is all about and the vision that you're expressing for Canada and for them, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the starting point is Canada's Promise. And you'll see within the links on Canada's Promise that there's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We've just really launched the webpage in the last couple of days. So it's constantly being updated with those contacts. And as I'm building my social media interface points, you'll see those added. So whether it's Twitter or Gab or whatever, I'm going on those, and I invite the conversation, because part of my platform is a fresh start, and it's about truth, transparency, and real conversations. And we want to have those real conversations. And I don't want to see the real issues that Canadians are angry about and struggling with being repressed and labeled and not had. And that's been the problem this last 5 years in the nation.
Grant, thank you so much for this conversation today. It's been a very informative hour and a little bit, and I know that our listeners will benefit from it. So I appreciate you being here, and perhaps as things go on, who knows, we might have the privilege of having you back.
Well, it's been a pleasure, David. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to speak with the truckers, and as simply as a citizen and as a patriot, I just thank that community for what it's done in terms of keeping the country going, and also for the spirit that it brought to the convoy in reminding Canadians of what Canada is about and where we need to be as a nation. So sincere thanks to all of you.
I want to thank Grant for taking the time to get together and do that interview for you. Some interesting perspectives on some very important topics when it comes to our nation. And just personally, I believe we are at a fork in the road for Canada. And it seems like politicians want to make that the case with every single election, but I think it's true. Our politics have never been more divided. And Canadians have choices to make around the direction in which they want this country to head. And so I appreciate Grant's thoughts on those issues. Many of those thoughts I align with. If you've listened to this show, you will know that I am all for community over government. And I'm not an anarchist. I'm not anti-government, but I believe it has a role to play, and it is not to be overbearing. It is to set the stage for people to make choices, drive success, grow, do things in an environment that through some basic protections applies or creates a safe playing field for learning and for business and for families and for citizens of this country to do their thing. And then it steps back and it steps away. I am heartened or hearkened back to a story from good friends of ours. And I think I've shared this on the show before, but she was someone who had suffered from cerebral palsy. And at the time when they were younger, her and her husband, times were rough. And a friend told her that, you know what, because of your condition, you qualify for, I think it was like $1,300 or $1,500, I forget the exact amount, dollars a month as a disability pension from the government. And her answer was amazing. She said, at first I was excited about it, but then I looked at the results that happen when someone becomes reliant on government funds. And the truth was, it didn't empower people. It usually entraps them. And while obviously the funds are needed every once in a while and helped in the interim, a continued reliance on anyone else, not just the Canadian government, is not healthy. I think Canada is the true north, strong and free, where citizens are independent and citizens are strong, and where the strength of individuals helps hold up and give a hand up to those that are struggling at any point in time. It's compassion mixed with strength. And so I'm excited about where this campaign will go. Grant is an unknown in the landscape. And so there's no delusions that he will be the front runner early on in this race. But if you are someone who values freedom, it was interesting. We were at a rally last night and here in Calgary, and the trucker convoy came up, and his point was simply this. I mean, he's all for peaceful protests, and he didn't believe that his party should have encouraged it in one moment and then said go home at the next. But his point is this, is that, conservatives tend to go to voters with tax savings and more money in your pocket, but that was not the spirit of the convoy. It was not about, decreasing taxes. It was not about, there were some hard issues that caught on to so many Canadians around Canada as the overpasses were filled and as people turned up to support the truckers that were part of this convoy that became much more than trucking, yes. But it hit a heartbeat in our nation. And it's around less government interference. It's around empowering people to be independently strong. It's about, kind of going forward by going back to some of the great things that built this nation, instead of this movement towards more of a government-centric society where government drives everything, government decides everything, government is all-knowing, all-powerful. That's not a place that I believe most Canadians want to be. Grant's website, canadaspromise.ca. So Canada's, C-A-N-A-D-A-S, no apostrophe, promise, P-R-O-M-I-S-E.ca or .com. You can type in either, and you'll be taken to his site. There are, if you like his message, there are some hurdles that every candidate has to face to remain in the race and to be part of the final group that goes on to debate and get voted on at the Conservative Convention. And that is, number one, an original $50,000. Deadline for him is April the 12th, and he's been receiving donations. There are a lot of people that love his message. If that is something that is on your heart after listening to what he had to say and you align yourself with him and you want to support that, you can go to canadaspromise.ca, and on every single page, there's a donate button, and there's even a donate and nominate form. Donation does not require that you be a Conservative member. Nomination requires that you are a member of the Conservative Party of Canada. But if you aren't yet, you can sign up and then go ahead and nominate Grant. There are a number of candidates that are in the field, and each of them brings to the table their strengths. I mean, Pierre Poilievre has to be considered the front runner as we initially head into, and many friends that I know that are Conservatives are, their votes already cast in their minds. And it would be for Pierre, who is, undoubtedly, and even as Grant remarked last night, deservedly labeled as the best attack dog politics has ever seen, and his ability to be concise and hold the government to account on financial issues over the last while is unparalleled. And the party owes Pierre a lot for that. And then there's Leslyn Lewis, who on the opposite side is known for her compassion. And for her caring and her ability to parlay a message from a party that is sometimes seen as irrelevant in this modern age into a conversation that makes it relevant and, brings forward the truth of how, conservatism actually can be progressive. Because in the right foundation, the right roots, we grow. And we move places, and we don't get stuck in a rut, and we don't do those things. And so, she's an interesting candidate. Jean Charest is a blast from the past, and he's got his history, both pluses and minuses that he'll defend. The truth is, every candidate brings in strengths, and that's hopefully what a great team will make. As I look at all the different ones, Grant is kind of a blend. As I've gotten to know him over the last little while, I've seen the ability, yes, to fight and be concise and be a pit bull on issues, but it's also driven by a heart for Canadian families, for the promises that this nation has. If you go to his website, he talks about the whispers that Canada has given so many families about opportunity, about independence, about being respected and a chance for children and all of those things. And that's what he's fighting for. So if you're in the area of politics and that's something that interests you, and increasingly you want to go from being passive in this area to being more active in this area, I encourage you to check out his website, canadaspromise.ca. canadaspromise.ca. Thanks again, Grant. Hope to have him on the show again. And this year is going to be an interesting year as the Conservative leadership race begins to take root and unfold towards, I believe the convention is this fall for that particular race. And it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling it's springtime. And for many provinces, COVID restrictions that had bound us and isolated us for so long have started to lift. And so there's more freedom that we feel and the ability to go out and be places and go places and do things. And so I hope that's been an encouragement to you and that your health is good and that all is good. Interesting times. I've said it many times, so proud to be a Canadian. I don't have a tattoo, but if I had one, it would be on my chest and it would be a Canadian maple leaf. I think we live in one of the best countries of the world. And I think to keep it the best country in the world, it requires being active voices. For so long, for many generations, we've been able to kind of take it for granted. And realistically, it didn't really matter who was in power. We kind of stayed within the bounds of what it meant to be Canadian. And lately with the polarization, I think it's requiring this nation and its citizens to be more active in their voice of what they want. And whether you agree with me or not, I love it when that discussion happens. Because when discussion happens, best decisions can be made. When all points of view are brought to a table, then best decisions can be made rather than just run with something you emotionally agree with but really haven't been forced to kind of scope out, delve out, and investigate. We live in a democracy, and democracies work when there is active participation. And so I hope you do that, no matter what color you fly politically, whether it's blue or red or orange or green, that you are active in listening to and considering, you know, what policies you support, what directions that you want this country to go in, and that you vote based on those things. We won't have to probably for another couple of years with the Liberals and the NDP announcing a coalition informally. And so I think it was until 2025, although informal coalitions in the history of Canada haven't always lasted and frequently don't last the full tenure of what they originally meant to do. So we may still be in for an election prior to 2025. And I think it's going to be a vibrant discussion for Canadians to have. Driver, as we end another show, I want to again remind you that you are awesome. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. God loves you, driver. David out. We'll see you next week.
Hey, it's Dave James here with Bar J Heavy Mechanical with another segment of Shop Talk. Today we're going to look under the hood and do a quick pre-trip inspection of our fluids, belts, electrical, and that kind of thing, hose clamps. Make sure you're up and ready to go and you can get to your destination on time. So for starters, we're going to start with the easy stuff. Wash your fluid is very important. You got to keep your windshield clean. You got to be able to see. You got to keep the sun out of your eyes and the streaks and that really bother you guys when you're on the road. So wash your fluids cheap. Keep it topped up all the time if you can. While we're on this side, we're just going to take a quick look at the steering shaft, steering components, make sure everything's tight and secure. Looking for electrical, you can see something's hanging off here on this truck. That should be addressed. I mean, this guy didn't say there's an engine light on or anything yet, but this is just something easy you can take back, maybe throw a zip tie on it so the steering shaft doesn't rip it off. Then it costs you a $100 connector down the road. So anyway, moving on, you want to look at the hose clamps, you want to look at the fan and the belt, make sure the belt's nice and secure, look for cracks in the ribbing, that kind of thing, dents, holes, rocks get up in there, they can put dents and can prematurely wreck your belt. You can see you got a little bit of a leak going on right here. It's like it's power steering hoses and that kind of thing. Doesn't look detrimental to you, but down the road it could be. It's going to cause issues. Take it into a shop like ours and we'll get that fixed up. Pretty simple. Brackets like this, like I said, hoses, rad securement, hood securement, electrical. Just a nice visual of what's going on up here, just to make sure everything's safe and sound. Rad hoses up here. We'll step around to the other side. Here you can have a better look at your belt. Most trucks have two belts. This is your main fan belt and this is your auxiliary belt up here, running your AC and that kind of stuff. Have a good look for cracks, splits, dents in the belt, as if rocks hit it and that kind of thing. Make sure the fan is nice and secure. Again, the pipes on this side. Make sure there's no leaks or nothing that's going to have a major leak on your trip. If there is something as simple as a little drip here and there, it doesn't hurt to take a flat blade screwdriver and tighten up some hose clamps on hoses like this. Just keep it nice and simple. Electrical here on your alternator. Make sure it's not corroded or anything like that, or you can take a wire brush and corrode it or remove the corrosion. If you do take a wire brush into this, try and take this post off. This is your battery positive post. Take it off, brush it off to the side, because if you're brushing this while it's on the metal alternator, it's going to short to ground and cause a bunch of sparks. You don't want that to ever happen. Coolant up here, make sure your coolant level's proper. You can see on this side here, there's a minimum level. Want to make sure you're at that level or above. And then, yeah, just another quick peek at your pipes. Like I say, put your hands on stuff, push it, feel around, have a look for exhaust leaks over here on this side. Have a look at your filters. A quick peek underneath the engine for drips and drops and puddles anywhere. And try and address that before you get out on the road. And that should get you to where you need to be. Hope that helps.
It was just a misunderstanding.
Ma jolie, oh ma jolie. Ah yeah, eh. Every time I come around you, baby girl, something doesn't feel the same. You said that I'm changing, but it's really you. I see how you play those games. Wifey type for a main man. A queen can make moves, a king can't. Snatch you up, now you taking. Gave you bricks, now you building a wall up, wall up. Lately you and I've been all love, all love. I don't know what's up with our love, our love. You forgetting all about us, oh. My jolie, oh my jolie. Where are you when I need you the most? You still MIA. This is murder, heart is melting. Girl, you got me. Called your bluffing, made you something. Now you talking, telling me to cool it off, cool it off. How can I cool it off, cool it off? Telling me to cool it off, cool it off. How can I cool it off?